The day I found out my retirement had been approved 3 years ago, I understood that they hadn't just stolen my money. They had stolen my time, my dignity, and the trust I placed in the wrong hands. My name is Eunice. I am 68 years old, and for a long time I believed that everything was going as it should. I waited. I waited in silence. I waited with the patience of someone who has worked their whole life and learned not to question too much. Whenever someone asked if my retirement had been approved yet, I always answered the same thing. It's still under review. These things take time. And I said this without resentment, without distrust, because I trusted. I trusted that if it hadn't been released yet, it was because the system was slow. I trusted that someone was taking care of it for me. I trusted that when the time was right, I would be notified. Meanwhile, I was making ends meet as best I could. She counted pennies at the end of the month. She postponed simple purchases. She accepted help only when her pride allowed. And often, she pretended everything was fine, so as not to bother anyone. What I didn't know, and it still hurts to say this, is that someone was getting paid for me. While I waited, someone withdrew. While I tightened my budget, someone used. While I grew old trusting, someone took advantage of my silence. But I didn't suspect anything, because I never thought people did evil on purpose. I always believed that mistakes happen. But betrayal, no, so I kept living. I kept waiting. I kept believing that the problem wasn't human, it was bureaucratic. Until the day a simple, almost unintentional conversation opened a crack in that certainty. A casual phrase, a question that seemed innocent. And suddenly, something inside me started to feel out of place. That's when I decided to go after it alone, without telling anyone, without asking for an explanation. And it was there, too, that I discovered the truth that made me sit down, take a deep breath, and realize that I hadn't just been deceived. I had been used, and I only found out when it was too late. I started working early, not because I wanted independence, but because I needed to. At home, nothing came easy. Everything had the weight of effort, of sweat, of a day that began before sunrise and ended when my body couldn't take it anymore. I worked at everything that came my way: cleaning, cooking, factory work, heavy labor. I never chose a job for comfort, I chose one out of necessity. What mattered was putting food on the table, paying the bills, and moving forward. For years I contributed, month after month, deductions from my paycheck, receipts saved, that feeling that in the future, at least one thing would be guaranteed: retirement. Not as a luxury, but as security. I never dreamed of traveling, buying expensive things, or living a comfortable old age. My dream was simple: not depending on anyone, having the basics, having dignity. As time passed and my body began to feel the weight of the years, I understood it was time to apply for benefits. That's when I was told it would be best to seek specialized help. You won't be able to do it alone. The system is complicated. It's better to have someone who understands take care of this for you. And I believed it. The person who showed up seemed exactly what I needed at that moment. Polite, well-spoken, confident. He used difficult terms, but always smiled, as if to say, "Don't worry, I'll handle this." He looked at my documents, analyzed everything calmly, took notes, and explained deadlines. He said it could take a while, that the system was slow, that patience was necessary. And I trusted. I trusted him because I've always been like that. One of those who believe more in a person's word than in distrust. One of those who think that if someone studied for this, they wouldn't deceive a simple woman like me. At that moment, I felt relieved. I thought that finally, someone was taking care of me. I returned home feeling lighter, with the feeling that even if it took time, everything was on track, that all I had to do was wait. And I waited. I waited as the months passed. I waited as the answers were always the same. I waited as life remained tight, but bearable. Every time I asked, I got the same explanation: it's still under review. The system is down. It should be ready soon. And I accepted it. I never questioned it. I never asked for proof. I never found it strange, because, deep down, I believed that no one would have the courage to mess with someone's future. I believed that retirement was something sacred, that no one would play around with it, that no one would use a person's time against them. Today, looking back, I see how much that trust was used against me. But at that time, I didn't see any signs. I only saw what I wanted to see. Someone taking care of my process while I continued to survive. And that's how, without realizing it, I handed over not only my documents, but my peace of mind, my time, and my old age to the wrong hands. The years began to pass by too slowly. At first, I still counted the time with hope. 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. I was thinking, it's normal. I've always heard that these things take time. Every time I called or texted, the response came ready-made, almost automatic, as if it were already memorized. It's under review. The system is congested. Unfortunately, it's beyond our control. But don't worry. Everything is fine. And I would stay. My routine didn't change because of the wait. It was already tight before, and it continued to be. I would wake up early, do my calculations before even getting out of bed. I would choose what I could buy at the market and what needed to wait. Sometimes it was gas. Sometimes it was medicine. Sometimes it was just a little dignity. I learned to stretch everything. Money, silence, patience. When someone asked if my retirement had come through yet, I would reply with an awkward smile. Not yet. It's under review. I said this as if apologizing for existing, as if the delay were my fault. I started avoiding certain meetings, not because I didn't like the people, but because I didn't want to have to explain again why I still didn't have anything guaranteed after a lifetime of work. I accepted help a few times, not many, always out of embarrassment. A food basket here, a borrowed sum there, promising myself I'd pay it back as soon as everything was sorted out. Meanwhile, time went on. 2 years, 3 years. The answers remained the same. Nothing new, no proof, no new paperwork. I never thought to be suspicious. It never crossed my mind that someone could be lying for so long. When someone insinuated something, I defended myself. No, he's right. He understands this. These things are slow. That's for sure. I was protecting the person who was deceiving me, without knowing it. My world was too small to imagine such a great betrayal. Meanwhile, I was getting older. My body felt it more. The nights grew longer. Worry became a constant companion. There were days when I sat on my bed and cried silently, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. Exhaustion of waiting. Exhaustion of believing. Exhaustion of not knowing how long it would last. And yet, I continued to trust, because trusting was easier than accepting that I might be being deceived, because questioning meant admitting that perhaps I had been naive, and that hurt more than the waiting itself. Until one day, something small happened. Nothing big, nothing dramatic. A casual phrase, uttered unintentionally, by someone who had nothing to do with the story. It was just a comment, but it kept echoing in my head in a different way. And for the first time in all those years, a doubt arose, small, timid, almost imperceptible. A doubt that I tried to dispel, but it had already begun to grow. The phrase was said without malice, without intention, like someone commenting on the weather. I was sitting at an acquaintance's house, waiting for the coffee to cool down when I heard, "Wait, but didn't your retirement benefits come through a long time ago?" I laughed. A short, automatic laugh. "No, it's still under review." She frowned. Strange, because my brother-in-law's came through really quickly. 3 years of waiting is a very long time, you know. That phrase wasn't a punch. It was a scratch. But scratches also bleed. I went home with that nagging at me. For the first time in years, something didn't add up. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept remembering every prepared response, every vague promise, every "don't worry." The next day, I did something I had never done before. I went looking for information on my own. I went to the website, called the number I always avoided, and went to the place they always said was pointless to go to. I waited, seated in a hard chair, my heart racing as if I were doing something wrong. When they finally answered me, I explained my situation in a low voice, almost apologizing. The girl typed in my CPF number. She looked at the screen. She frowned. He typed it again. "Ma'am, just a moment." That just a moment lasted seconds too long. She came back and said, with a nonchalant tone that seemed too good to be true, "Your benefit was granted 3 years ago." I didn't understand. "What do you mean, granted?" She turned the screen slightly towards me. It has been active since such and such date, including funds already released. The ground disappeared. My body felt hot and cold at the same time. My hands began to tremble. The sounds of the room faded into the distance. But I never received anything, I managed to say. She looked at me carefully. It appears here that the funds were withdrawn. I felt shame even before I felt anger. Shame for having trusted. Shame for having gone through hardship. Shame for having defended someone who deceived me. I left there without knowing how I got home. Each step seemed false. Each memory came with a new weight. The years of waiting, the nights spent crying, the help accepted with humiliation. All this, while someone else was receiving what was mine. That day, I understood that they hadn't just stolen money from me. They had stolen my peace of mind, my time, my old age, and above all, my trust. I sat on the edge of the bed and cried like I hadn't cried in decades. It wasn't a loud cry. It was a heavy, choked, exhausted cry. There alone I knew none of that had been a mistake. Nothing had been delayed. I had been deceived for years and was only beginning to understand the magnitude of it. I spent days unable to organize my thoughts. It wasn't just sadness. It was a confusing mix of shame, anger, disbelief, and guilt. Guilt was the first thing to set in. Guilt for not being suspicious. Guilt for not asking sooner. Guilt for accepting vague answers as if they were absolute truths. I used to wonder repeatedly while staring at the ceiling at night, how could I not have noticed? How could I have let this happen to me? Each memory took on a new weight. I remembered the times I had to choose between buying medicine or food. The times I pretended not to be hungry so I wouldn't have to ask for help. The birthdays that were too simple. The overdue bills. The silent humiliations. None of that had been an unavoidable necessity. It had been a consequence. And that hurt more than any lack of money. I began to feel anger, but not the kind of anger that explodes. It was a quiet anger that tightened my chest and left my body tired. Anger at those who took advantage. Anger at those who looked at me and saw someone easy to deceive. Anger at a system that allows this to happen. But mostly, I'm angry at myself for trusting without questioning. I've always been the type of person who believes in a person's word, who thinks that character can't be faked for very long, who prefers to trust rather than live distrusting everything and everyone. And suddenly, that part of me seemed like a mistake. There were days when I barely got out of bed, not because I was lazy, but because getting up meant facing a truth I still couldn't accept. I cried remembering the conversations in which I defended the person who deceived me. He's right. He's sorting it out. These things really do take time. I said this with conviction, like someone protecting someone from the distrust of others. Today, those phrases echoed in my head like mockery. The worst part wasn't thinking about the money. It was thinking about the time. 3 years. 3 years of my life that I could have lived with less fear, with less hardship, with more dignity. 3 years in which I accepted crumbs thinking it was normal. At times, the sadness would come on so strong that I needed to sit on the kitchen floor to catch my breath. My body reacted as if it were grieving. And in a way, it was. I was burying the image I had of someone, and along with it, the image I had of myself as someone protected, respected. There was one night when I found myself talking out loud to myself. It wasn't just the money, it was the humiliation. Because the money can eventually be recovered. But the humiliation of having gone through hardship while someone else benefited from your trust, that leaves scars. I thought about giving up, about pretending I never knew, about accepting it as just another injustice in life. For a few moments, the idea of not confronting seemed easier, less painful, less tiring. But something inside me began to change. It wasn't courage yet. It was indignation, a calm, mature, firm indignation. I began to understand that if I remained silent, I wouldn't just be losing money. I would be confirming the idea that people like me can be deceived without consequence. And that I couldn't accept. Even though I'm hurt, even though I'm trembling, even though I'm scared, I didn't want revenge. I didn't want a scandal. I didn't want to shout. I just wanted the truth. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt something other than pain. I felt that, despite everything, my voice was still mine. And that silence, this time, would no longer be an option. I didn't go after him out of anger. I didn't go to yell, threaten, or humiliate him. I went because I needed to hear the truth from the mouth of someone who owed me explanations. I entered that office with my heart racing, but my posture firm. My hands were sweating, but my voice came out stronger than I had imagined. I didn't beat around the bush. I didn't make a scene. I didn't cry. I simply said, I went to the INSS Brazilian Social Security Institute. My benefit was granted 3 years ago, and I want to know why I never received a cent. For a few seconds, he didn't answer. He looked at the table. He shuffled through papers that said nothing. He took a deep breath, and that silence was the confirmation even before the words. When he finally tried to speak, there was no longer any confidence. Neither that practiced calmness, nor the tone of someone who can solve everything. He stammered. He said there had been a mistake, that it was a system mix-up, that he was going to check, but I wasn't there to hear excuses anymore. I said, with a calmness that even surprised me, I already checked. The money was withdrawn. Someone else received it on my behalf. That's where his face changed. There was no screaming. There was no dramatic confession. There was something worse, the inability to deny it. He knew, I knew, and that space between us became truly heavy. Gradually, the truth began to reveal itself not in detail, but in enough pieces to cause complete pain. The benefit had been released. The money had been transferred. The money was no longer there, not because the system failed, but because someone chose to take advantage of it. My whole body went cold. It wasn't a surprise. It was betrayal. Betrayal because I had entrusted not only my legal process, but also my old age, my safety, my dignity. I looked at him and said something that had been stuck in my chest for days. I gave you the most fragile part of my life, and you chose to take advantage of it. He tried to justify himself. He said he was going to return it, that it wasn't quite like that he got lost in the middle of things, but no word carried more weight. Because there is no justification for those who take advantage of someone else's waiting, ignorance, and trust. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I didn't need to. The truth, as it was spoken there, was stronger than any scandal. At that moment, I didn't feel small. I felt lucid. I understood that I wasn't there to beg, nor to negotiate. I was there to end a lie that had lasted for years. When I got up to leave, I realized something important. He still had money, but I had recovered something he could never give back to me if I remained silent. My voice, my clarity, my limit. That day, I didn't leave with my money back, but I left with the whole truth, and that changed everything. After that day, nothing was ever the same again. And I don't say that as an easy victory because it wasn't. The following days were confusing, silent, and heavy. I would wake up with the feeling that something had been ripped away from me, but at the same time, there was a new space inside my chest. It was as if the truth had hurt, but it had also opened a window that had been closed for years. I had to learn everything all over again. Learn to ask questions. Learn to be skeptical without guilt. Learn to speak without fear of seeming ignorant. I genuinely sought help. It wasn't easy. Hearing everything again, explaining the story, reliving every detail. It was exhausting, humiliating at times. Some people didn't believe it. Others downplayed it. But you should have paid closer attention. These things happen, and that hurt. Because nobody can imagine what it's like to live for years waiting, believing, trusting, without having the tools, without guidance, without a voice. I recovered some of what was mine. Not everything. Maybe never everything. But little by little, I recovered something greater. My posture changed. The way I walk changed. The way I look at people changed. I stopped automatically lowering my head. I stopped apologizing for asking. I stopped thinking I was bothering people by wanting to understand. I started talking to other people my age, neighbors, acquaintances, simple people like me, and I discovered something that broke my heart. I wasn't the only one. There were other women waiting. Other elderly people trusting, other people living with little, while someone took advantage of their ignorance. It was there that I understood that the silence hadn't only hurt me, it had allowed it to continue happening. So I started talking, not from a platform, not on social media, but face to face. Question. Check. Don't be ashamed to doubt. I saw people find courage. I saw people go after what was theirs. I saw fear turn into action. And every time someone said, I'm so glad you told me that. I felt that somehow, that stolen time was being given new meaning. I haven't become bitter, nor have I become suspicious of everything. I became aware. Today, I know that trust is too precious to be given carelessly, and that respect is not a favor, it's a right. I still carry scars. I still feel resentment some days. I still think about everything that could have been different. But I no longer feel small. I no longer feel invisible. I no longer feel deceived in silence. I understand that recovering money is important, but recovering one's own voice is essential, and no one can take that away from me. Today, when I look back, I don't just see the woman who lost money. I see the woman who wasted years believing that trust was enough. I learned the hard way that trust cannot be blind. It needs to be accompanied by information, by questions, by the courage to confirm. There is a very dangerous idea that simple, elderly, or humble people only need to accept and wait, as if questioning were disrespectful, as if asking were a lack of gratitude. It is not. Asking is caring. Confirming is responsible. Being suspicious sometimes is self-respect. For a long time, I thought the mistake was mine, that I had been too naive, that I deserved the pain for having trusted. But no. The mistake is never made by the one who trusts, it's made by the one who betrays that trust. The truth is that many people take advantage of silence. They take advantage of the lack of information. They take advantage of the fear of causing trouble. And the more we remain silent, the easier it becomes for those who deceive to continue. If you're waiting for something that never arrives, if someone always has a vague answer, if everything seems to be moving forward, but never actually gets anywhere, ask questions, investigate, seek help. You're not being difficult. You're protecting yourself. And if you know someone older, someone simple, someone who lives waiting for answers, don't ignore them. Don't minimize it. Don't say that's normal. Sometimes all that person needs is someone to say, let's check it out together. Because the pain of being deceived isn't just about material loss. It's about the feeling of having been used. It's about the silent shame. It's about wounded dignity. And that hurts deeply. Therefore, if this story touched you in any way, I extend a sincere invitation to you. Follow our channel and become part of this community of women who overcome the difficulties and adversities that fate brings. Every day, stories of real women who suffered, learned, and decided not to remain silent. Like this video. Comment if you've ever experienced something similar or if you know someone who needs to hear this. Share it, because your action can prevent someone else from going through the same pain. Here, we don't turn scars into shame. We transform scars into a voice.